Hi, and welcome to another edition of Windsor Teaches Ancient History. If you're jumping in now, you're on episode 3 of a 4-part series all about the Achaemenid Persian kings and their interactions with other peoples. If you're jumping in at episode 3, you may want to look at episode 1 on Cyrus and episode 2 on Cambyses II first. Next up to the throne is Darius the Great. In the ancient sources, we're given a very convoluted story of what happens at the accession of Darius and the death of Cambyses II. Cambyses II supposedly has a dream that someone called Smerdis will usurp him. It just so happens that his brother is called Smerdis, and so he has him murdered. On his way to deal with an uprising that he thinks has been caused by someone else called Smerdis, false Smerdis, otherwise known as Gaumata or Bardia, he slashes his leg in the same place where he slashed the Apis bull and dies later of a gangrenous infection. It is then up to Darius to quash the rebellion led by false Smerdis and the Magi brothers, otherwise known as Bardia or Gaumata. He rounds up 6 other Persian nobles in order to do this and unseats the false king. However, there is also the job of choosing the next king. It is decided between Darius and the 6 other Persians who were present at the unseating of the usurper that the man whose horse neighs first before dawn will be the next king, not necessarily a reliable way to choose the next monarch. It just so happens that Darius uses a trick, making his horse neigh first, making him the next king. Upon becoming king, he has inherited a kingdom full of rebellions and woes. Some of these rebellions were, for instance, in Media, Assyria, Parthia, Babylonia, and Egypt, to name a few. So he has inherited a troubled empire. Not only this, but he is not directly descended from Cambyses II. He's a very, very remote relation, and so he has a problem with legitimacy, as the throne up until this point has always been hereditary from father to son. Darius the Great is going to see a lot of instances in his career where he has to enforce his legitimacy through propaganda. You can also interpret these rebellions in a number of different ways. For instance, you could on the one hand interpret it as opportunists in each of these areas rising up at the death of the previous king, or you could easily interpret it as them understanding that Darius is not the rightful heir to the throne and rising a rebellion for that instead. One of the most important pieces of propaganda that Darius uses to get legitimacy and therefore improve his relationship with his subjects is the Byzantine inscription. We can see it here on the side of a mountain at a crossroads. The Byzantine inscription is written in 3 different languages. They are Akkadian cuneiform scripts, they are Old Babylonian and Elamite as well. And you could easily say that this is Darius trying to reach as many people as possible, which therefore says something about his relationship with his subjects. Let's look at the iconography and the symbolism of the Byzantine inscription. Here we see Darius on the left, his foot on the rebel king Gaumata, who he is just unseated. In front of him, in chains, are the 8 other rebel kings who had raised revolts in various different areas of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. It's worth noting here that Darius is the largest figure on this inscription. You can see the various types of writing around and above him as well. He is holding up his right hand in peace. He himself is unarmed and therefore gives an aura of peace. The Zoroastrian sacred symbol, the fire of a heart, is above. And therefore, this is Darius giving himself legitimacy by saying on this inscription that he is favored by the Zoroastrian god, and therefore he is the one that is the rightful heir to the Achaemenid Persian throne. Another key thing here is that although Darius himself is not armed, he has some guards standing behind him who are armed, who subtly threaten violence to anyone who would rise up and rebel against Darius. We can also see other events in Darius the Great's career which show him as desperate to earn legitimacy, and he does that by various different building projects to make a statement that he is the rightful heir to the throne, despite not being a direct descendant of the previous king Cambyses II. It also says something about his relationship with his subjects. In building these public structures, he is giving himself importance and therefore hopes to earn the respect of his subjects through his lavish building projects. The building projects of Darius to curry favour with the subjects under the empire and the conquered peoples include, but are not necessarily limited to, lavish building projects such as the finishing off of Cyrus's ancient Persian city, Pasargadae. In doing so, Darius links himself back to the archetypal perfect Persian ruler. He also develops the city of Susa and begins construction on the grand Persian city of Persepolis, which Alexander the Great will set fire to 200 or so years later. Not only this, but Darius builds the Darius Canal. Word is that this project had been started before Darius by a previous pharaoh of Egypt. However, Darius claims the credit. Not only this, but a vast and expansive network of roads across the Achaemenid Persian Empire called the Royal Roads. You could consider all of these projects to directly benefit the people under the empire. There would be new homes for Pasargadae, Susa, and Persepolis. The Darius Canal would stimulate trade in the area and the vast network of trade routes that stem from it, and you could say something similar of the royal roads. Not only this, but with the royal roads, messages could now reach one end of the empire to the other at breakneck speed, increasing communication and allowing for quicker mobilization of the Persian army. At this point in his reign, it's fair to say that Darius has fulfilled most of the pieces of criteria that what makes a good king. However, there is one vital element of the formula missing. If Darius truly wants to emulate his hero and his predecessor, Cyrus the Great, then he needs to add additional other countries and territories to the Persian Empire. He now turns his attention to Scythia and Thrace, home of the nomadic tribespeople of the Scythians, who are a loose federation of nomadic and tribal people. Herodotus indicates that Darius takes 700,000 of his soldiers across the Bosphorus, which is a piece of water that separates Europe from Asia. It's said that Darius crosses the Bosphorus with a huge and vast, expansive standing army, which is not ideal for fighting highly mobile, nomadic, horse-riding tribespeople. Darius now spends quite a long time pursuing the Scythians as they split up and splinter off into various different groups, going north of the Danube River in northeastern Europe. He calls the Scythians to standing battle a number of times, and each time they refuse, because in doing so, they would give up their advantage of high mobility. Eventually, Darius tires of the chase and builds 8 forts at the northern, what would have been a northern frontier, but the forts are not finished before he leaves. When he's making his retreat back through Thrace and Macedonia, having been defeated by the Scythian army, not necessarily in battle, but now his vast army is now exhausted. In order to escape the Scythians as they attack his army while they rest, he separates the injured and the ill from the rest of the army. He lets them know that he will soon be back and he's going off for a quick stroll with a vast portion of the army. In reality, what he does is he leaves that ill, injured, or sick section of the army to be gradually picked off by the Scythians as he beats his retreat back across Europe and across the Bosphorus back to Persia. In many ways, you can compare this military effort to that of Cambyses, who goes into Ethiopia without much planning. However, Darius has planned this expedition, and it's not gone nearly as well as he might have hoped. In this defeat, he is not able to match up and fit into the boots of his predecessor and idol, Cyrus the Great. There is some controversy over the success of the Scythian expedition. Many historians regard it as a very expensive stalemate, never actually meeting the Scythians in a standing battle. However, there were many benefits to the Scythian expedition. For instance, Thrace was rich in gold and precious metals, which added to the wealth of the Persian Empire. It also meant that the Persians now had access and control of the entire northeastern part of the Aegean Sea, which would open up and stimulate trade to the Persian heartland and surrounding areas. However, this is when another issue arises for Darius, particularly in the form of the Ionian Greeks. Ionia was an area of Asia Minor in which many Greek city-states existed. They had been largely cooperative with Darius since he came to the throne in 522 BC. However, they were now inspired to rebel against Darius's leadership. In Athens around this time, a man named Solon had put into place a new form of radical democracy. And looking with envy at these Greek city-states, the Ionian Greek city-states wanted democracies of their own and wanted to throw off the shackles of the monarchic system. A man named Aristagoras, who was from the Greek city of Miletus, fell out with his local satrap and begins to implement a democracy at Miletus. He goes to mainland Greece to seek the support of the Spartans, but they refuse. However, the Athenians gladly offer 20 ships in order to help them throw off the shackles of oppression. This begins tensions between Athens and Persia that will last for quite some time and will come to a head later on. The Greeks invade western Turkey and they take Sardis and burn it to the ground. Eventually, they retreat back to the coast. There is also a face-off between a Greek fleet of 353 ships and a Persian fleet of 600. The Persians, with superior firepower, eventually win and bring the entire region back under Persian control. Despite what your views may be on the Scythian expedition, Darius does not stop meddling in mainland Greece. Initially, he wants to get revenge on Eretria and Athens for their role in the Ionian revolt. However, the story goes that his ships are wrecked and he has to beat a retreat. However, he does take over the very wealthy island of Thasos. In 491 BC, Darius sends messengers to Athens and Sparta. Athens refused to submit to Darius's demands for earth and water, and Sparta throw the Persian messengers into a pit for criminals. The next year, Darius and the Persians launch attacks on Naxos and Delos. Naxos resists the Persian invasion, and as a result, when they are beaten, the island is utterly ruined. Delos, on the other hand, do not resist and are treated with mercy by Darius and the Persians. After Naxos and Delos, Darius sends more Persian soldiers towards Eretria, which it besieges. It's met by a much smaller Greek force who successfully defeat the Persian army using Greek hoplite tactics. It's one of the most famous defeats in ancient history. So we see here, while Darius is desperate to claim the favour of people under the Persian Empire, there are a few different missteps there in his attempt to expand the Persian Empire. He's met with some successes in getting some key locations in Thrace, which add to the Persians' wealth. However, it's very difficult to imagine that the Scythian expedition is much of a success, and so far Darius has achieved very little success in mainland Greece as well. However, the stage is now set for Xerxes I to come through and start his interaction with the Greek people in the Persian-Greco wars. Thank you for listening to this episode. This has been all about Darius. Please tune in for the next episode, episode 4, all about Xerxes I and his interaction with other peoples.